At 70 years old, the dread of Segoe County still grips me. Lake effect snow obliterated roads and ensnared entire communities. This was more than a storm. It was a siege. In the snowbelt, survival hinged on community spirit and sheer determination. When the powerful winds from Lake Ontario collide with the Tug Hill Plateau, a bizarre transformation occurs, imprisoning an entire American populace within a white enclosure of its own making, where their persistence relies on the warmth of their neighbors, echoing memories of past storms. Segoe County, New York, is no stranger to the harshness of winter. Yet the recent lake effect phenomenon has shattered all previous records, burying residences up to their rooftops and wiping highways off the map. The Great White Silence delves into the intricate meteorology and the unyielding spirit of America's snowbelt. By interweaving the brutal reality of the current crisis with the narratives of legendary blizzards, such as the monumental storm of '66, we uncover a society defined by its ability to withstand isolation. This narrative explores the consequences when contemporary infrastructure buckles under nature's raw power, and highlights the quiet bravery embodied in a shovel, a plow, and the human spirit. A peculiar stillness descends upon upstate New York just before the world vanishes. It isn't the quiet of an empty room or a slumbering metropolis. It's a dense, oppressive silence, the sound of a falling barometer, of a vast, wet breath being drawn across the expanse of Lake Ontario. Then, the sky collapses. We are not discussing a mere dusting here, nor are we talking about the kind of snow that causes school cancellations in Virginia or traffic slowdowns in Boston. We are speaking of a meteorological siege. Currently, in Segoe County, the roads aren't merely impassable, they have simply ceased to exist. The very landscape has been erased. Interstate 81 has become a graveyard of abandoned semi-trucks, their drivers huddled in cabs as snowdrifts climb past their windshields. In the villages of Parrish and Mexico, front doors are sealed shut, and second-story windows have become the only means of exit. This is the lake effect, a terrifying yet beautiful alchemy where frigid Canadian air sweeps over the comparatively warm waters of the Great Lakes, absorbing moisture like a sponge and then squeezing it out over the land in narrow, forceful bands. Observing the footage from Segoe today, one witnesses the panic of the contemporary world. The flashing lights of stranded ambulances, the desperate pleas on social media from households depleting their heating oil, the sheer paralysis of a 21st century grid brought to its knees by frozen water. It feels unprecedented, apocalyptic even. However, upon closer inspection, beyond the buried SUVs and struggling power lines, another scene unfolds. A flicker of light from a kitchen window, half hidden by a 6-foot drift. A chimney steadily exhaling smoke, a symbol of defiance. For while the rest of the nation watches the news with dismay, the inhabitants of Segoe are steadfastly continuing what they have done for generations. They are hunkering down, drawing on their collective memory. To an outsider, this appears to be a disaster zone. Yet to the locals, it is merely the cost of living here, a recurring battle similar to those fought in 1993, 1977, and most notably in 1966. This is a place where history is not recorded in books, but measured in feet and inches of snow. And as the snow persists, falling at a relentless rate of 4 inches per hour, transforming day into a hazy twilight, a crucial question arises. In an era of climatic uncertainty and modern fragility, how much longer can this way of life endure? And what intrinsic quality of this harsh, freezing landscape compels its people to remain? Welcome to the snowbelt. There is a specific hue the sky assumes over Lake Ontario just before the world disappears. It is neither gray nor black. Instead, it's a bruised, heavy purple, the color of a contusion on the horizon. And when one observes it from the porch of a farmhouse in Mexico, New York, or from the dashboard of an 18-wheeler on Interstate 81, a profound realization sets in. Time has run out. For much of America, winter is merely a season, a calendar entry. But here, in the shadow of the Tug Hill Plateau, winter is a geographical entity, a palpable weight. At this very moment, Segoe County is dissolving. This is not about a snow day where children stay home to enjoy hot cocoa. This is a meteorological siege. The interstate has been erased from the map, replaced by a boneyard of abandoned vehicles, their emergency lights feebly blinking beneath 4 feet of snowdrift. In the town of Redfield, snow is falling at 5 inches an hour, a rate that defies comprehension, burying front doors, then windows, then the lower parts of rooftops. To the contemporary observer, this resembles the apocalypse. We see the breaking news alerts, the National Guard trucks struggling for traction, the inherent fragility of our 21st century infrastructure buckling under the immense mass of frozen water. We witness a society founded on perpetual motion, suddenly and violently immobilized. Yet, by looking beyond the snow-covered SUVs and the frantic weather reporters, one can discern the indelible marks of this place, a landscape that has relentlessly attempted to reclaim its inhabitants for 2 centuries. This is the snow belt, where resilience is not a mere catchphrase, but a survival tactic, passed down through generations like a cherished heirloom. While the media focuses on the pandemonium, the inhabitants are doing precisely what they did in 1977 and during the legendary blizzard of 1966. They are kindling their wood stoves, checking on elderly neighbors down dirt roads, and excavating tunnels from their living rooms. This narrative explores the clash between the irresistible force of the Great Lakes and the unyielding spirit of the American people. It truly is a mystery. Why do we choose to build our lives directly in the path of such a formidable adversary? And when electricity fails, and roads vanish, what precisely is it that provides warmth? To comprehend the sheer intensity of what is currently unfolding in Segoe, one must look northward. Gaze beyond the frozen harbor, past the lighthouse encased in ice, all the way to the Canadian tundra. It commences with a physical equation as straightforward as it is devastating. It begins when a mass of Arctic air, utterly bone-dry and a frigid 30 degrees below zero, detaches from the polar vortex and screams southward. It glides over the Canadian Shield until it reaches the shoreline of Lake Ontario. And here, the magic, or perhaps the curse, transpires. Lake Ontario is a deep, unyielding body of water. Through November and December, and even into January, it retains the lingering warmth of summer. The water remains relatively mild, perhaps 40 degrees Fahrenheit. When that supercooled Arctic air sweeps over this warm, open water, the lake behaves like a colossal tea kettle, pumping both heat and moisture upward into the atmosphere. Meteorologists refer to this phenomenon as fetch, the distance the wind traverses over the water. The greater the fetch, the more powerful the engine. By the time that air mass reaches the New York shoreline, it is pregnant with moisture, heavy and unstable. It then encounters the Tug Hill Plateau, a geological incline that forces the air to ascend. As it rises, it cools, and then it unloads. This is the lake effect machine, a factory engineered to produce one thing: snow. Not mere inches, but feet. However, the genesis of this story is not solely about thermodynamics. It is also about human hubris. When the initial European settlers arrived here, seeking to forge a gateway to the American West, they perceived the water as an asset, not a threat. Segoe was the first freshwater port in the United States, marking the terminus of the Segoe Canal. It was a booming town, built on flour, timber, and the promise of commerce. The Haudenosaunee people, who had journeyed through these woods for centuries, possessed a deeper understanding. They knew that this specific corner of the map was a battleground between the relentless winds and the waters. But the industrialists of the 19th century were obstinate. They looked at the harbor and envisioned wealth, a shipping lane. They made a Promethean bargain. We will harness the economic power of the Great Lakes, and in return, we will endure the wrath of winter. They constructed their Victorian homes with steeply pitched roofs to shed the massive snow loads. They built their railroads with formidable plows. They planted their flag in the snowiest populated region in the lower 48 states. They failed to realize they were erecting a civilization directly inside the barrel of a cannon. If the 19th century was characterized by endurance, the 20th century was defined by defiance. As the internal combustion engine captivated the American imagination, the fundamental equation in Segoe County underwent a profound transformation. In earlier times, when a nor'easter buried the city, the world simply ceased its rhythm. One stoked the wood stove, ate from the root cellar, and awaited the thaw. Snow was a natural pause button. But by the 1940s and 50s, America had collectively decided that pausing was no longer an acceptable option. The post-war boom roared ahead. We were constructing suburbs, building the interstate highway system, and in Owego and Fulton, factories operated 3 shifts a day. The Nestle chocolate plant, the paper mills, the aluminum factories. They were ravenous entities, demanding a constant influx of raw materials and workers clocking in, irrespective of the sky's temperament. Thus, we militarized winter. This is when the snow belt identity solidified into concrete reality. It was no longer sufficient to simply shovel a path to the outhouse. We had to maintain a clear, black-topped Route 104. To achieve this, New York State and local municipalities invested in a mechanized cavalry that would have made Patton envious. We are speaking of the golden age of the Walter Snow Fighter. These were not mere trucks. They were behemoths of steel and hydraulics, often fabricated right here in New York. They boasted massive V-plows at the front and wing plows on the sides, operated by men who approached snow removal as a fierce contact sport. A distinct brand of American optimism permeates footage from this era. One can observe it in the grainy 8mm films, a 10-foot wall of white obstructing a county road, an obstacle that would have brought a wagon train to a complete standstill. Then, an enormous orange apparatus, spewing dense black diesel fumes, would career into the snowdrift at 30 miles per hour. Snow would erupt 50 feet into the air. It was a fierce, roaring, and triumphant display. The population of Owego County surged as people migrated into the heart of the storm. They acquired split-level ranches in communities like Mexico and Parrish, precisely within the most extreme snow bands. They invested in station wagons equipped with snow tires, embracing the misconception that technology had triumphed over nature. For a few decades, it felt as if victory was ours. The economy thrived, fuel was inexpensive, and snowplows were indefatigable. We had transformed a weather crisis into a standard municipal service, believing we had subdued the elements. If you matured in the snow belt during the 1960s or 70s, your memories aren't measured in years, but in feet. When the lake effect snow machine truly activates, the world assumes a distinct, hushed quality. It's unlike a coastal blizzard with its screaming gale-force winds. A heavy lake band often settles over Owego County with an almost eerie stillness. It's a white drape descending from the sky, relentless and perfectly vertical. For a child, this represented the quintessential winter experience, the very architecture of a dream world. We didn't merely traverse the snow, we inhabited it. By January, the plow-created banks lining the sidewalks in Fulton or Pulaski would soar 6, 7, sometimes even 10 feet high. Walking to school involved navigating trenches reminiscent of the Western Front. The world narrowed into a white corridor, open only to the gray sky above. Then came the ritual of the radio. You would awaken in the pre-dawn darkness, the windows opaque with fern-like frost so dense it resisted all attempts to scrape it away. Stealthily, you would descend to the kitchen where the AM radio, already warm, emitted its gentle amber glow. Your anticipation was for the local announcer's voice, reading the alphabetically arranged list of school closures. When he declared Owego City Schools, Mexico Academy, or Sandy Creek, it was an unadulterated shot of dopamine. It signified that the rules of civilization had been temporarily suspended. The subsequent days were a sensory overload. There was the aroma of wet woolen mittens drying on a cast-iron radiator, permeating the mudroom with that distinctive, damp, animalistic scent. There was the taste of Campbell's tomato soup and grilled cheese, which, inexplicably, tasted different, superior, when the house was buried under snow. We constructed elaborate tunnel networks in our front yards. We leaped from garage roofs into drifts that completely enveloped us. A soft, freezing embrace that blocked out all light and sound until we clawed our way back to the surface, gasping and laughing. But this wasn't solely for the children. For adults, the profound snowfall enforced a compulsory respite from the demands of American life. There was a unique fellowship born of the catastrophe. When a vehicle became lodged on a residential street, 4 neighbors would materialize from the whiteout with shovels. No words were exchanged. It was an innate response. Strangers became temporary house guests. Bars in downtown Owego transformed into impromptu shelters. A palpable warmth permeated these taverns. Steamy windows, inexpensive lager, and the collective self-satisfaction of locals who possessed the knowledge to survive conditions that would overwhelm an outsider. For several days, money held no sway, and status was irrelevant. The only valuable commodities were a functioning snowblower, robust physical strength, and a well-stocked pantry. We were isolated, yes, but never more connected. To comprehend our enduring tolerance for these relentless snowfalls, one must grasp the essence of upstate New York during the mid-American century. It was more than just a picturesque backdrop for winter recreation. It was an economic engine. In the decades following the Second World War, Owego County functioned as a vital organ within the industrial framework of the Northeast. We boasted the port of Owego, linking the Great Lakes to the Atlantic. We had the colossal Nestle plant in Fulton, manufacturing chocolate for the global market. Subsequently, the nuclear stacks of 9 Mile Point rose like sentinels along the lakeshore. This was a blue-collar dominion, founded on the promise of consistent wages and pensions. However, this economy depended on one non-negotiable principle: movement. Shift workers had to reach the factory by 6 a.m. Freight trucks needed to access the thruway. Milk tankers had to deliver to dairy farms. In this context, snow was not magical. It was an impediment, an economic insurgent. Consequently, we declared war. This era introduced the bare pavement policy, a uniquely American hubris, the conviction that with sufficient horsepower and rock salt, we could simply annul the weather. Municipal budgets in the snow belt swelled with funds for snow removal. We didn't merely possess plow trucks. We commanded fleets of Oshkosh and Walter snowfighters. These immense, four-wheel drive behemoths resembled vehicles designed for the Normandy invasion. They were monstrous orange steel beasts, thundering down Route 104 with V-plows the size of billboards. A distinct social hierarchy existed in those days, and during a state of emergency, the plow driver occupied a position near the apex. They were the cavalry. I recall observing them from the living room window, witnessing sparks fly as the steel blades scraped the asphalt. It was a violent industrial ballet. We terraformed the winter. We deposited thousands of tons of sodium chloride onto the roadways, bleaching the bottoms of our trousers and corroding the rocker panels of our station wagons. Within 3 years, we had accepted the rust as the cost of our mobility. This marked the peak of the suburban experiment. We were expanding, constructing ranch homes further from town centers, confident that the county could maintain open thoroughfares regardless of what Lake Ontario challenged us with. We believed our infrastructure was impregnable, our economy too robust to collapse, and that we had finally engineered a stalemate with nature. The transformation wasn't instantaneous. It seeped in like a draft from a poorly sealed window. Subtle initially, a persistent chill that one couldn't quite shake, until the realization dawned that the furnace had ceased operating. By the time the 1970s arrived, the optimism of the post-war boom began to corrode, much like the fenders of the Chevys we drove through the slush. For 2 decades, we had believed we could engineer our way out of winter. However, the arithmetic was beginning to shift against us. The initial warning sign was not meteorological. It was geopolitical. When the oil crises struck, the fundamental equation of life in the snowbelt shattered. Suddenly, the diesel required to power those colossal Walter snowfighters was no longer inexpensive. Heating a drafty 2-story Victorian dwelling on the shores of Lake Ontario transformed from a manageable utility expense into a financial catastrophe. We watched gasoline prices escalate at the pump, shivering in our parkas, realizing for the first time that our dominion over the snow was leased, not owned. Concurrently, the ancillary damage of our chemical warfare became impossible to disregard. The bare pavement policy carried an unforeseen cost. Salt runoff suffocated the creeks. Bridges deteriorated faster than we could repair them. We examined our infrastructure, the very steel and concrete we relied on for safety, and saw rebar exposed like fractured ribs. The snow remained unchanged. The lake effect bands continued to form over Fulton and Pulaski with the same primeval intensity. But we were undergoing a profound shift. The factories that served as the anchors of these towns began to falter. Shifts were reduced. The silence between snowfalls grew incrementally louder, more disquieting. A burgeoning sense emerged that perhaps we had overextended ourselves. We began to hear tales of neighbors packing up, not merely for a vacation, but permanently. They were relocating to places with names like Phoenix and Tampa, locales where shoveling was not a recognized verb. The allure of the winter wonderland was diminishing. We were still engaged in the conflict, but morale was plummeting. We gazed at the drifts accumulating against our sliding glass doors, and for the first time, we perceived not merely a chore, but a trap. If the 1970s ushered in the economic cold front, the winter of 1977 delivered the crushing blow. This transcended mere weather. It was an act of geological violence. We refer to the beginning of the end, not as the moment the snow ceased falling, because in Owego it never truly does, but as the moment our hubris finally fractured. We had convinced ourselves that with enough horsepower, rock salt, and overtime wages, we could tame the Tug Hill Plateau. But Mother Nature surveyed our plows, our schedules, and our bare pavement policies, and she scorned them. It commenced with a low-pressure system that settled over the unfrozen lake like a lid on a boiling pot. The wind shrieked from the west, collecting moisture and depositing it in bands so severe they defied meteorological predictions. We were no longer measuring in inches. We were measuring in feet per hour. The roads, the veins of our commerce and connectivity, simply vanished. Interstate 81, that grand asphalt ribbon designed to link us to the world, devolved into a parking lot of abandoned sedans and jackknifed rigs, buried until only their antennas protruded through the crust like peculiar metallic reeds. For the first time in a generation, the machines failed. The plows, those immense orange beasts we revered, were driven into ditches or simply ran out of fuel, attempting to repel an ocean of white that steadfastly refused to recede. Police radios crackled with a new brand of panic. "We can't reach them." This was the seed. You sat in your living room, the windows utterly dark, not from nightfall, but from snow pressed tightly against the glass. You watched exhausted news anchors declare that the county was closed, not merely delayed, but closed. A state of emergency was no longer just legalistic language. It was the tangible reality on your doorstep. When the National Guard arrived, operating heavy loaders and troop transports because standard vehicles proved useless, the illusion shattered. Our contemporary American existence, with its grocery runs, daily commutes, and school bus pickups, felt incredibly delicate. We found ourselves stranded indoors, relying on burning furniture and wood stoves because the fuel tankers couldn't navigate the snowdrifts. The quiet that descended upon Segoe County wasn't serene. It was oppressive. It signaled a community's dawning realization that despite all our technological advancements, we were merely small, fragile beings at the mercy of a vast, frigid lake. When the diesel engines ceased and the state plows halted their operations, a different kind of mechanism engaged. It wasn't hydraulic. It was profoundly human. This part of the narrative illustrates how Segoe County's topography transcended being a mere map and transformed into a trial of character. There's a particular brand of resilience forged on the Tug Hill Plateau, a tenacity born not of bravado, but of dire necessity. When official support couldn't reach us, our neighborhood ceased to be a mere collection of residences and became a unified survival unit. The first sound that pierced the howling wind wasn't a siren. Instead, it was the grating of aluminum on asphalt, or more precisely, on ice, the sound of the shovel brigade. You couldn't open your front door, as the snowdrift was packed as densely as concrete against the frame. So you exited through a second-story window, or forced open a garage window, and began to excavate upward. Overnight, we became a subterranean society. We didn't stroll down the sidewalk to check on Mrs. Miller. We tunneled to her. Sleds, those flexible flyers and plastic saucers usually reserved for weekend amusement, were repurposed as ambulances and supply convoys. You would see fathers pulling toboggans not laden with laughing children, but with 5-gallon gas cans and crates of milk, trudging 3 miles to the nearest corner store that had managed to clear its generator. The snowmobile clubs, whose members were typically shooed off private lands for their noise, suddenly became our cavalry. They were the only vehicles capable of movement. They transported insulin to diabetics in Redfield and ferried doctors to the hospital in Segoe. The machines that were toys on Friday transformed into life-sustaining systems by Sunday. The economy, too, underwent a transformation. Money lost its worth. The new commodities of exchange were rock salt, kerosene, and labor. If you possessed a snowblower that started on the first pull, you were the most affluent individual on the block. You didn't charge your neighbor to clear his driveway. You did it because his wood stove was keeping your children warm when the power lines failed. In 4 feet of snow, there was no red state or blue state. There was only stuck or unstuck. We discovered we were more resilient than we appeared. We learned that a casserole dish passed through a snow tunnel tasted better than any restaurant meal. We were cold, we were weary, and our backs protested vehemently. Yet, reflecting on those tunnels, there was a peculiar, defiant joy. We were conquering the lake at its own game, one shovelful at a time. The remarkable thing about 4 feet of snow is that eventually it recedes. The sun emerges, the plows clear the asphalt, and the water flows into the drains. But in Segoe, the snow leaves an indelible mark on the spirit that never truly vanishes. After the state of emergency was lifted, after the National Guard packed their vehicles and departed, the storm ceased to be merely a weather event and transformed into a foundational cultural experience. It became the primary measure of time in the snow belt. You didn't inquire when someone married or graduated. You asked, "Where were you during the blizzard?" This region developed a distinctive sense of pride, a frozen medal of honor. We began to see it on bumper stickers and screen-printed T-shirts sold at local stores. I survived the Great Whiteout. It wasn't a lament, it was a boast. In the diners along Route 104, placemats displayed grainy photographs of tunnels dug to front doors and cars entombed like prehistoric fossils. The storm solidified the local identity. If you could withstand the lake effect, you could withstand anything. It created a clear distinction between the locals and the outsiders, the flatlanders who panicked at the sight of 2 inches of flurries. We walked differently. We drove differently. We possessed an intimate understanding of nature's harshness that the rest of the nation only witnessed on the evening news. This legacy infused the architecture and infrastructure. We constructed our roofs with steeper pitches. We acquired trucks with greater ground clearance. The garage wasn't just for parking. It was a fortified space stocked with rock salt and backup generators. The storm educated us that comfort is ephemeral, but preparedness is paramount. Nevertheless, there was also a longing for the disarray. Years later, perched on bar stools in cozy taverns, men would recount stories of the storm, not with terror, but with a peculiar fondness. They missed the stillness of the blocked roads. They missed the clarity of purpose. In a world progressively complex, the storm offered simplicity, humanity against snow. And for a few glorious days, we stood our ground. The storm became our lore. Just as coastal fishermen speak of rogue waves, the people of Segoe recall the sky turning that bruised purple-gray, the aroma of ozone, and the hush before disaster struck. It was our war story, shared with anyone willing to listen. Today, traversing Segoe County in January, the landscape appears familiar. The white fields, the gray sky, the salt-streaked asphalt. Yet the battle lines have shifted. We've exchanged the romance of a sudden onslaught for the clinical exactitude of a forecast. The era of the whiteout out of nowhere is largely a phantom tale. Now, before the first snowflake descends, Super Doppler radars display storms in angry magentas on our smartphone screens. We no longer gaze at the sky to discern what's approaching. We consult an application. Mystery has yielded to the algorithm. The response has also transformed. It's no longer a scrappy assembly of farmers with pickup trucks. It's a mechanized division. The contemporary plow is a formidable workhorse. Colossal tin-wheelers with wing blades and GPS tracking, deploying a brine solution that dissolves ice on contact. They operate in echelon formations, clearing the interstate from curb to curb in a single pass. It is efficient, boisterous, and relentless. We have transmuted snow removal into a logistical challenge, resolved with hydraulics and tax revenue. However, the weather itself has grown intricate. The veteran residents will attest that winters now feel different, more erratic. We still receive significant snowfalls. Lake Ontario hasn't entirely softened her fury. But these are often succeeded by abrupt thaws, transforming majestic drifts into gray slush and mud. The pristine tranquility of a deep freeze is punctuated by the incessant drip, drip, drip of a bewildered climate. Yet the town's essence persists. You still see snowmobiles gathered outside taverns on Friday evenings. Schools still close, though now children complain about remote learning instead of meticulously preparing their sleds. The isolation that once characterized the experience has been diminished by fiber optics and 5G towers. You can be enveloped by 6 feet of snow in a farmhouse in Redfield, yet simultaneously stream a film from Hollywood and video chat with a relative in Florida. We are, undeniably, safer. No one is left freezing in their vehicle on Route 81 without a means of communication. But something has been relinquished in this exchange. We have sanitized winter. We have managed the risk so thoroughly that we rarely encounter that primal sense of awe, that reminder of our insignificance against the vastness of the sky. We have surmounted inconvenience, but in doing so, we have forfeited adventure. Dwelling in the shadow of Lake Ontario, amidst the crosshairs of the snowbelt, is a decision that defies conventional economic rationale. If one considers solely the data, the corrosion on vehicle undercarriages, heating bills rivaling mortgage payments, the sheer hours dedicated to shoveling, it seems illogical. However, the spirit of the northern tier cannot be quantified by a calculator. Snow exerts an influence on a community that sunshine never could. It functions as the great American equalizer. When drifts are piled 6 feet high against the mudroom door, the banker's driveway is just as buried as the mechanic's. The storm strips away superficial social distinctions, leaving only the fundamental question: do you possess the resilience to endure this? And, more importantly, when the plow passes and buries the elderly neighbor's entrance, will you grab your coat and assist her in digging out? In a contemporary culture fixated on speed, on the ceaseless friction of commerce and connectivity, a genuine Segoe blizzard remains one of the few forces on Earth capable of imposing a halt. It demands surrender. For 48 hours, the world contracts to the confines of your living room and the reach of your snowblower's throw. There is a profound, almost spiritual clarity in that enforced pause. It reminds us that, despite our fiber optics and heated seats, we are not the masters of this environment. We are merely its temporary occupants. This weather cultivates a distinct character, stoic, inventive, and quietly dignified. It is a fortitude forged by necessity. One quickly learns that complaining does not clear the sidewalk. One learns that the only path out is through. And one learns that warmth is not a given. It is something one creates, log by log, neighbor by neighbor. The lake effect is the pulse of this region. It is the sculptor of the landscape and the architect of the local psyche. To wish away the snow would be to wish away the very quality that makes this place enduring. It is the cost of admission for residing so close to such fierce beauty. We endure the white burial because we understand that it forges something unbreakable beneath. When the sky finally clears over Segoe County, the light is blinding. It strikes the fresh, undisturbed powder and fragments into a million shimmering diamonds. A dazzling brilliance, almost painful to behold, yet utterly captivating, transforms the world into a fleeting image of flawless perfection. No tire marks, no grime, just an unending, undulating canvas of white beneath a vivid blue sky. The wind's whisper ceases, and a profound tranquility descends, a stillness so deep it resonates in your very bones. Then, gradually, this frozen tableau begins to stir. The first metallic rasp of a shovel against concrete breaks the silence, signaling the start of recovery. Front doors are forced open, battling against accumulated snowdrifts. Over fences now barely discernible in the snow, neighbors exchange silent, knowing glances. A mutual recognition of perseverance. They persevered. Coffee is brewing. Gas pumps are being excavated. Children are already pulling their sleds towards the town's highest slope. This is the moment of recompense, balancing the scales. The lake effect's harshness is the cost. But this morning, a sharp 0-degree morning where your breath hovers like vapor, is the rich reward. It serves as a potent reminder that nature, far from being malevolent, is simply immense. Coexisting with it demands a modesty increasingly uncommon in our society. Eventually, the snowdrifts will recede. The dismal gray slush of March will give way to April's mud, followed by the vibrant green eruption of an upstate summer. Vehicles will be extricated, roads will darken, and the crisis will morph into a tale recounted over diner coffee. "Remember that huge one?" they'll inquire. "Remember when the mailbox was completely buried?" Yet the snow leaves an indelible impression, one that outlasts its melt. It strengthens the unseen bonds within the community. It reminds the inhabitants of the northern regions that they are survivors, united by winter. They don't remain here despite the snow. In a complex, peculiar way, they remain because of it. When the tempest rages and the earth is cleansed, no other place on the planet evokes a similar sense of belonging.